Hello, friends. Happy Tuesday, and welcome to today's live level up conversation. Whether you're tuning in live or catching me on replay, I'm so grateful to have you here. I hope you're having a beautiful week. Let's get started.
Welcome to Level Up with Winnie Sun. Market update. Speed round. Award-winning financial pro. And now, get ready. I present to you Level Up with Winnie Sun.
Hello, friends. I'm Winnie Sun, your host and award-winning financial pro, a Forbes contributor, and a CNBC council member and contributor as well. We're streaming here live on many different social media platforms. So thank you so much for making the time to be here today. Jump in if you don't mind and say hello, introduce yourself. It is truly an honor to be here with you right now. Now, we know the market hasn't closed yet. So before we jump to my very special guest, today's special episode, you're not going to want to miss her. She's really going to be someone that you're going to love spending the afternoon with today. But before we get there, let's talk about how the market's doing. Hasn't closed yet. We're still almost about an hour left, not quite, a little bit less than that. But the Dow is currently up 66 points. NASDAQ, unfortunately, down about 10 points. And the S&P 500 is in the positive, around positive 4 as well. So let's hope the market holds up. Of course, it's been a pretty challenging week, as you know, following last week. Of course, the Federal Reserve's decision continues to weigh pretty heavily on investors' mind, wondering whether or not interest rates will remain the same or if they're going to come down a little bit, go up a little bit. Unfortunately, the decision that the Fed came out was sort of in line with expectations, with a smidge of uncertainty, indicating really a cautious approach to the monetary policy. In fact, the Fed has now maintained its benchmark target rate at a 23-year high of 5.25% to 5.5%, which is, of course, designed to combat the very high inflation levels that we've had the last few years. In fact, the U.S. Central Bank had already previously hinted that perhaps they would be lowering interest rates for 2024. And by now, we were thinking perhaps even the first sign of rates would come down already, but not quite yet. In fact, they're saying that the main concern here is to keep inflation at a sustainable level, reaching around 2%. Now, I'm sure you would agree hearing this information. You'd be like, well, can't they just lower rates and still keep us at 2%? Maybe not so much, because fortunately or unfortunately, depending on which side of the coin you're looking at, the US economy is still going pretty strong and consumers are out there still spending money. And therefore, the Fed has now removed language indicating a bias towards further rate hikes or firming, if you will. In fact, the US federal bank's preferred inflation gauge recently dipped just below 3%, which was actually in the last 3 years, actually the first time. So that's a big news. You know, people just keep on spending and the economy gets stronger. These are things that we would see as a good thing, but it also means that the Fed has really the challenge of maintaining inflation at reasonable, healthy levels and not letting it get much higher than where it was. You know, it was so high the last 3 years. They want to make sure that we have better days ahead. So now they're saying just a 35% chance of a rate cut in March. Now, this is down from 50% for those who were asked to maybe guess whether or not we would get a interest rate hike. But nonetheless, the projection for the Fed is that in 2024, there will be rate cuts. And they're even saying that analysts are predicting a 75 basis point rate cut by the end of 2024. Now, I don't know how you feel about that, but I would say that we can't really control it right now. So we might as well move ahead. And that is, we get to talk about something very, very interesting. In fact, I want to talk about home ownership here in the United States because today, actually, I shouldn't say today. Today, I read it. It has been out for a few days now. It wasn't just today. But USAFacts has shown a very important recent research and data on the home ownership numbers here in the United States, particularly as it pertains to young Americans. In fact, the most significant increase in home ownership has occurred among individuals under the age of 35. In fact, I've been speaking to a lot of people this age who are shopping for their first first home. Some people are even on their second home. Some people have been looking at investment property. But here's the thing, over 34% now has grown to 39% during this period of home ownership for those under the age of 35. In fact, the history of home ownership in the United States, of course, has seen ups and downs, with rates rising until 2024, followed by a decline for 12 consecutive years and hitting a low point in young people homeownership in 2016. So it was about, so nonetheless, this is actually good news. We talked about, right, that inflation looks like it's at better levels. We also know that mortgage rates have now quieted down a little bit. Of course, we like to see mortgage rates drop a little bit more for those who are looking to purchase homes. But the data is, and that's the thing, data is so important. And that's why USA Facts is so important. In contrast, this gives us an idea of number one, like who's buying homes, and is everybody able to afford homes? And what is the long term impact on the cost of housing for people of different ages and demographics and whatnot? So I invite you to check out that study. I thought it was fascinating. In fact, I thought it was really fascinating just to continue to see the racial disparities in homeownerships as well. In fact, the studies show that over 30% of white Americans were able to own homes, while other um, nationalities such as Black, Native American, Asian, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander homeownership rates, although have increased, not to that same level though as well. So lots of things. If you haven't checked it out yet, I'm hoping after today's episode, you're going to jump on and do what I do, which is basically bookmark the website and subscribe to your newsletter. Lots of great information there. Because today I have President of USA Facts, Poppy MacDonald. By the way, I'm going to say Poppy is not only like superwoman, but I call her dear friend. She is incredible. She is here. Hello, Poppy. How are you today?
Hi, Winnie. I'm doing great. It's so nice to get to connect with you. And thank you for going to usafacts.org. And I'm so glad you find the information of value.
It is wonderful. Yes. USAFacts.org. I probably messed that up, but that is it. Definitely search for it and bookmark on your website. Poppy, I looks like your background today is somewhat like mine. I think like today we're dealing with some cooler, rainy weather. And I was like, it's poetic. I'm meeting with Poppy today. I feel like we're gonna be in the same zone today.
It is a little overcast here, shockingly, in Seattle, but I always say it is always sunny in Seattle. Like the sun will break through soon. I know it. I'm holding out for it, but it's really nice to connect with you. And I'm here in our offices in the Seattle area.
I love it. And it's a beautiful office. Thanks for making the time. I know you're very, very busy. For those of you who are brand new to USA Facts, well, meet Poppy. Poppy leads USA Facts, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit civic initiative and source for well visualized data. Basically, everything on there is very easy to read. By the way, they use a great amount of pink, which, as you know, is my favorite color, and great resources for all Americans, even those outside the US here, really giving you an idea, a snapshot of how we're doing as a nation. And it helps to lead an effort to help Americans like you and I really have a solid information of the facts so that we can decide on our own with the knowledge of, I guess, things like where we're going to live, right? How we're going to vote, like what decisions that we make. I love this because as a financial nerd, it's all about the numbers, and USA Facts puts the numbers in ways that even someone like myself can understand. But yes, Poppy she continues to serve as president and chief operating officer, previously Politico USA, impressive national journals publisher and president, as well as chief revenue officer there as well, and goes on and on. I know you've also worked at Gallup, and launched the World Poll. So I think it's safe to say, Poppy, you've also been a numbers geek for some time as well.
I love that. Yeah, I love data. And I think as you try to make sense of what's happening in this country, or what's happening with your business, or what's happening in your home with your own personal finances, the data really gives you an accurate picture, and is very straightforward. And so as we looked at government, it is really hard to get access to the people's data. And Steve Ballmer found that out himself when he was trying to do more to help lift people out of poverty. And he wanted to go to the numbers. Having been CEO of Microsoft, he wouldn't make a decision without looking at data. And he realized that data is not accessible from the government. So at USAFacts, we go to over 70 sources of government data. We bring it all together and not only do sort of that gritty hard work of like cleaning and making the data understandable, but then we take it and make it, we hope, accessible to people by putting it in simple data visualizations, by relating the data to issues that they're tackling right now, and by writing content and just explaining it in a way that makes it accessible to the public.
I love this. It's so important that we have this information. Speaking of Microsoft, you're in like Microsoft's backyard right now. I
Yeah.
see a lot of that technology in your background as well. This is so true. I think a lot of times we'll receive data and we will feel sort of overwhelmed. But I want to share this with you, all of you as well, because I know a lot of you watching. I see CrossX Fighter joining us on YouTube. I know a lot of you watching are also big creative content creators. And one thing that USA Facts does that I love personally is that their graphs and their data, a lot of it can be shared. You can embed their graphs into, like I've done so for articles or different types of content. This is powerful stuff that at the end of the day, it's something that doesn't change. The numbers don't change, right? The collection of the information is important so that we can understand it, but it's not a political thing. It really comes down to black and white. So that's what I want to talk about today, Poppy, if you don't mind. I have some questions prepared and I'd love to ask you. And I'm going to start with this. Like, how does USA Facts, do you think, play a unique and sort of innovative role in sharing public data? Because we know it's all over, right? The government produces all this data, but what makes your platform different?
I think what makes usafacts.org different is that we know there, as you said, there is a ton of information out there, and it can be very hard to sift through that information. So you're looking at all of this content, you're listening to, one station and then an anchor on another station, you're listening to one politician that's the incumbent and somebody running against them, and you're getting sometimes two conflicting pictures of what is going on in this country. Should I be worried? Should I be concerned? And what USA Facts does is provide simply data. We're nonpartisan. And so our goal is just to make the data and information accessible and to let people judge for themselves by the numbers. Is the country headed in the right or wrong direction? By the numbers, how are their kids faring in schools? And are they happy with that? By the numbers, is their community safe? And how does that compare to the country? What is happening with immigration by the numbers? So we look at these kind of hotly debated topics where people are coming out on very different sides of the issue, and we just provide the data and then let people decide how they think the country is doing and advocate for the change that they want to see. And we hope that that grounding in the numbers really helps build not only transparency, but trust. Okay, I trust this is what's happening by the numbers, and now I feel more empowered to understand what this means for me and how I may want to vote or change I may want to advocate for in my community.
I love that. It's so powerful stuff. I mean, I know like you and I are both parents. We have kids that go to school and they're being taught a lot of things about history. And of course, but this is current information, this is current data. And it's from all these different sources and most of them government sources, right? And let's talk about that. I mean, for those of our elected officials in Congress in particular, right? You would think they would have this data in front of them and maybe in forms that's is accessible to them, but perhaps that's not. I guess that's more of a question is what's been your experience? Because I know that USA Facts has now started initiatives of directly working with our U.S. Congress.
Exactly. We have been working with Congress, people on both sides of the aisle. And because we think, yes, the people need to be empowered with access to data, the people in this country, and so do our lawmakers. We think we can have a thriving democracy if our lawmakers have access to data and if they can root decisions about legislation and understand is it working or not based on what do the numbers say? What does the data tell us? And so I've had the opportunity to testify before the Committee on the Modernization of Congress about what would it be like if rather than just estimating how much is this going to cost, we asked lawmakers when they're crafting a bill to say, what is this legislation trying to do? And what is the data it's trying to move? And then how will we measure if it's successful? And that way we won't decide, I don't like that legislation because it was passed by that other party. It'll just simply say, did this legislation work by the numbers? And so we think there's a lot of opportunity for Congress to be able to legislate by data, and we know there's an appetite for it. And so we publish a report that is annually that looks at, by the numbers, what is happening in this country on major issues. We went and interviewed 50 people on Capitol Hill to say, what are the issues that are Congress needs to make decisions about this year. So you can imagine it was things like immigration, like housing, like jobs. And we pulled that data together so they could understand where are we as a country, how has that looked over time, and what are the opportunities. And we've been delighted at the reception. We meet with people from both sides of the aisle. And at the end of the day, we think they do want data. They want it from a nonpartisan source, and they need a little help getting access to it. It is technically publicly available data. It takes a lot of work to make it accessible. And that's really where USAFacts comes in to be a helpful partner.
Well, let me ask you this, Poppy. I guess we wish we were in the room with you during these discussions. Are there certain areas you could share with us that you think that really maybe you found that they were gravitating to? There's certain areas or certain types of data they were like, wow, this is exactly what I wanted to learn about.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's things about what their constituents are experiencing. So they may be hearing, gosh, it feels like it is harder to buy the things I used to be able to buy. Okay, well, they know their constituents are feeling that. What do the numbers tell us? So we look at things like, okay, the middle class 20 years ago versus the middle class today, they actually are making less in market income. And to be in the middle 20%, so we say the middle class is literally the middle 20% of the population, it takes less income to be in that middle 20%. They are paying less in taxes. They are getting more benefits from the government. So we look at overall, how is the middle class faring? And then we also look at things like housing, where we know 51% of people in this country are burdened by the rent they have to pay for their housing. And burdened means they're paying more than 30% of their income toward rent. There's also a housing burden as well. So people who are paying a mortgage, that burden is a little less, but about 20% of our country is burdened by the mortgage that they have to pay. It's more than 30%. So we bring some of that data so they can understand what is happening for their constituents by the number, not just a feeling, but what is happening in this country. And then you can imagine too, hot topics like immigration. What is happening with immigration? There's certainly a conversation about, immigration's hot right now, right? What should our policy be on immigration? Are too many people crossing the border? That's for Congress to decide. We can simply show the numbers. And yes, immigration is up post-pandemic, but it's still down 40% from where it was before the pandemic. And then we can look at what jobs are foreign-born workers taking in this country. We know that over 4 million of those jobs are in healthcare. And we know that 1 in 4 construction workers are, 1 in 4, so 25% of those construction jobs are held by foreign-born workers. So we can think about what might the impact be on those jobs, on those industries, if we decided just restrict immigration more. So those are some of the things that Congress is certainly taking an interest in.
Not only Congress, but just hearing you speak about this, Poppy, I'm thinking like a young person today who's trying to figure out what they want to study in college or what they want to do when they grow up. These are great resources. You can find you read and follow this information. You can almost see certain trends on areas that you might want to spend more focus on. And I think the topic of immigration is going to be a big one for the 2044 election. I know we're going to get to that in just a bit, but let me ask you this, Poppy, before I get to it. Obviously you're very, very talented. Your background is so impressive. You could have done anything. What attracted you to public service?
Yeah, so I have had this, my career, I've been in different fields, but it's all been about transparency of information and a fundamental belief that I hold that people in this country deserve transparent information about what is happening in their country and how this country and how their elected leaders are or aren't working for them. So I would say that was true when I was on Capitol Hill and making that information accessible to constituents, to when I worked at Gallup and taking polling data so that people's opinions and views were accessible, to working in media and making that information accessible. And USA Facts, I feel so lucky because I don't know of anyone who's working to make government data accessible to the public and who's doing it with no profit motivation. We're simply doing it because we believe the public deserves access to that data and information. And I was really excited about the opportunity to lead an organization like that.
Lead an organization, working with nonprofit efforts. This is a beautiful thing. One thing we talk about it a lot is that everyone's concerned about misinformation. The whole Twitter now turning to X. There's so many, like, there's so many strong views, and a lot of them are very polarizing. I think many people are starting to exit and not participate because they're almost turned off by the amount of misinformation, and they don't know where to go, what to trust, and what to do. I know you dealt with some of this during the early years of the pandemic, and we're still going through it now. But what gives you hope that Americans are still caring about facts, despite the fact there's just so much polarizing information out there that it's hard for us to decipher truth from lies?
Yeah, I am super empathetic to people who feel really frustrated and like they just want to give up, because again, as I mentioned, sometimes they're hearing two very different pictures about what's happening in this country, and they're like, I just want to know the facts. And that's why at usafacts.org we are trying to just make the data accessible, and do that in a way that is understandable, and doesn't take a position, doesn't take a side, isn't trying to advocate for anything, just wants the numbers to be transparent. And what gives me hope is I think initially, Steve Ballmer thought, hey, this is important to make this information accessible. He wasn't seeing as many people as he would want coming to USA Facts to access it. And so that's where, when he hired me, he said, how do we make this so that people know we exist and will come and get the data and feel empowered? And we have seen our traffic really climb. So we went from, a few people on the site every day to now we're seeing traffic of 28 million people coming. And so seeing that interest of people saying, yeah, I didn't even know I needed government data. I didn't even know government data answered my question. But when you connect that data and those numbers to real-time issues that worry me. So we look on an SEO, we look at search engines and say, what are people searching for? What are their questions? Or we look at what's in the news. And then we say, how can we surface data that's relevant and helpful and explain something very complicated, but in an easy to understand way? And that's really our mission. We have a customer service mission, and we are every day looking at how do we answer people's really complicated questions and make it simple.
I love that. It must have been exciting, Poppy, to see your baby go from a few visitors per month to like 28 million. I'm sure it's almost surreal, just the amount of volume people are coming now to your baby to find information. Make your data science heart very, very happy. So I want to ask you about this. You've been very successful in your career, and now USA Facts obviously very, very prominent and has a very important role, especially now that we're going into this very heated election season. Talk about the challenges. Have you had any challenges at USA Facts, and maybe you could share something that you had to overcome during the process.
Yeah, well, I think one of the early challenges, and this was a challenge for everyone in this country, but was COVID. And I had someone on my team. We had a team of 12 say, "Hey, I'm seeing all of these tweets from people who say, I am a reporter or I am a doctor, and I can't get access to how this outbreak is occurring in where I live." And they were like, it's only in a few counties in Washington state and only in a few counties in New York. We could provide this to people. And we started to provide that information just through our 12 people on staff kind of doing the sheer work of sometimes it was, making a phone call or sometimes going to a sheriff's Facebook page to get that daily count, make it accessible. And, it grew, right? And it was in all 3,300 counties across the country. And we had 12 staff. And so it, looked a lot like people working overnight shifts. And then it looked like, okay, how do we add engineering know-how? How do we get technology to support that mission? And we ended up feeling so proud that we could be the official provider of the COVID tracking to the White House, to the Centers for Disease Control, and to provide that service for our country. And I think more importantly, too, it really shined a light on why it's important that we have data standards in this country and a mechanism for sharing local to state to federal data about what's happening in this country, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's about affordability of housing or quality of schools. Like, that is data that should be available to citizens and not just in the time of a crisis.
I think that's a great example, and it's so true. But without knowledge, we don't know, right? We don't know what's happening in our backyard. We don't know of the cases of COVID, or how many people are in a neighborhood that don't have certain resources. And that data is really powerful, I think, for those who are making those decisions, but also us as individual families. And just having knowledge is power. I love that. Let me ask you this: when you think about USA Facts, what does success look like for you?
Oh, that is a great question. So when I think about what does success look like, I mean, our mission is to empower Americans with the facts. And for us, that looks like more data. So we really want to scale the data that we have available. I think it is mind-blowing to people to hear there are more than 90,000 government entities in the United States of America.
Wow.
And the federal government is just one of those, right? So thinking about how we make all those 90,000 government entities in the United States of America make their data accessible and do it on a single platform. So we're really looking at scaling with more data. We want to make it more accessible. So we're constantly thinking about what are those questions Americans have, whether that's tied to an election or whether that's tied to things happening in their lives or in the news. How do we present the data in a way that's factual and understandable in just the numbers? And so how do we visualize it? How do we put some content around that so it's understandable? And then we also want to make it more consumed. So we want to reach people where they're at. So that could look like being on TikTok. That looks like a great visualization on Instagram. That looks like doing interviews with people like you, Winnie, who we know have a following of people who care very much about the numbers and follow the data. And so that's really what success looks like to me.
I love that. Well, for those of you who are watching, I know many of my friends who are in the media are watching this. This is a really, really important topic because this is also the 2024 year election year. So those of you who want more data, definitely reach out to Poppy and her team because they have some incredible information. For those of you, of course, who create content like I do, definitely give it a look because I try to pull some of their infographics and their graphs and charts. Really, really powerful stuff. Well, we're going to talk about that, Poppy. The 2024 election, obviously a big, big year. And regardless of who our candidates will become, I think many people have speculation. I think we can all agree it's not going to be a boring election. It's going to be a big one. And there's going to be a lot of media coverage, of course, as it always is on this particular topic. What are some resources that USA Facts is preparing? I'm guessing you all are working full steam ahead.
We are. So our full steam ahead looks like, I talked about more data. So looking at what are the topics that are going to be driving this election: immigration, healthcare, housing, jobs, the economy. And so we are aggressively pulling all of the data that matters, cleaning it, standardizing it, getting it ready so that we can build products off of that data. And those products will look like data visualizations, articles, interactive tools, so you can look at where you compare to the country. So really, we're just looking at how do we make sure that as these issues come up in presidential debates, as these issues come up for voters, that there is a resource they can go to that will have the numbers on those hotly debated topics. And really looking forward to being a resource to Americans at this time and being that source at usafacts.org.
Yeah, I think it's going to be powerful. I for sure am going to be checking out usafacts.org. before making those decisions. Because so many times, it's hard enough trying to decide who you want to vote for president, but then there's all these other issues that you also have to make an educated decision on as well. And having that knowledge to certainly make you feel like you're really taking advantage and being responsible with your vote as well. I got to segue a little bit because one thing I know you and I are, deal with as well as basically being working moms, which I know you and I both love that experience. But let's be honest, it's also a big responsibility, right? So I want to ask you this, Poppy, because obviously you do so much and you've done before. I know working in Washington, how much busier you were then as well. What is your best mom hack to getting more time with the people that you love more? What do you find saves you time and money?
Yeah, so I would say one mom hack is I don't know if this got me more time, but it got me more quality time. And so I always said when my husband and I were both working very intense jobs in Washington D.C., like one parent will always be there. Like we'll always make sure a parent's there, but then no guilt if you're not there, right? Like a parent's going to be there. And when you're there, you're all in. So you're not distracted by your phone or you're not actually doing something else, but like you're all in and really taking in that experience and making it quality over quantity. Like that was certainly a relief. And then I'll say, since moving to Seattle, I am super lucky that my husband has taken a pause on his career to really help out. And so I think it's sometimes acknowledging that the mom doesn't always have to do it all, and that you can accept help. And I realize that I'm pretty privileged that I get to have my husband do this at this time, but I'm not the one putting dinner on the table, and I'm not the one going to the grocery store. And I think it's just accepting help wherever you can get it, or wherever it comes from.
I love that. I love that, Poppy. I'm 100% in agreement with you. It's impossible for us to do everything. When I will share with you, Poppy, some really good advice I read. I actually think I read this from one of the mom contributors on Twitter. They said, if you're, anything you're not doing. So if you're not doing the dishes, if you're not vacuuming, maybe your spouse, like my husband, let's say my husband's doing dishes. However he does the dishes is the most perfect way to do dishes. And you just smile and you just say thank you and give and don't make any comments. That I think has been such great advice. All right. Speaking of advice, I want to ask you this, Poppy. I couldn't let you go without asking you this. The best professional advice that you've ever been given. Can you share with us what it is and who gave it to you?
Yes, so this may strike you as it struck me as odd because I received it in a for-profit revenue-oriented company, but I loved this advice from the chairman of the company, which was he called it a spirit of generosity. And so he said, when you're interacting with a customer, think about what is the value I can provide? How can I exceed this person's expectations? And don't think about the dollars as being attached to it. Like the money will come if you provide the value, but first think about providing the value. And I think that is the most important advice when you really think about putting the customer first. And if I serve the customer, like the business will grow and thrive. And it was counter to sort of what I thought business was about.
I love that. Actually, it reminds me a lot of the spirit of Tony Hsieh, who was a CEO, past CEO of Zappos. Said it was sort of like that, delivering happiness. I love that. All right. Well, I think, Poppy, it's time for speed round. Do you feel ready for this?
I feel ready. I'm going to have to run soon because I've got a meeting waiting for me. But yes, we'll make it speedy.
We'll do well.
Speed round.
We'll make this fast because Poppy's got to run. So talk about speed round. This will be speedy. All right, Poppy, one question and we'll let you run. And that is this. Okay, so we're going to pretend power outage has occurred now in Bellevue, Washington. It's the Wednesday before a long weekend or a break for your kids. The Clippers aren't playing, so you don't have to worry about that. You've been emailed 4 round-trip tickets anywhere in the world. What do you do and where do you go?
Ooh, for a long weekend, this is probably maybe it's a lot of people's, not the most creative, but Maui. I'd love to go just spend 4 days in a place that I find to be really special and beautiful and so relaxing and calming. And I think Maui can really use our support right now. So that's the place I would go.
I love it. I love it. I'm sure they would love to share their aloha spirit with you. Thank you so much, Poppy. It was truly a grateful to spend some time with you. I know you got to run, but I thank you so much for being our show and being part of the Level Up community. Of course, those of you who are here with us as well, definitely give us a like and subscribe. And then, of course, give usafacts.org a follow and subscribe to their newsletter. Great information right to your email box. Thank you so much, Poppy, for joining us today. For those of you who, of course, are still here, let's go ahead and give you the numbers once again. The market hasn't closed yet, but the Dow is currently up 55 points. NASDAQ is down 38. S&P 500 is down less than 1. We've got about 20 minutes left to go on the market. Thank you so much for tuning in, to being here with us. Thank you so much for Poppy had to run, so we'll say goodbye to her next time, but we'll definitely have her and her team back shortly. Of course, watch full episodes of Level Up with Winnie Sun. Check out NASDAQ, Amazon Fire, Samsung, LG, Roku. I've got some new content coming out that I can't wait for you to check out there as well. And of course, if you do share this show online, just like Joshua has, CrossX Fighter on YouTube, and many other friends, Vicky on Facebook as well, please tag at Winnie Sun to show your support so I can probably thank you on a future episode. With that, to dive into deeper content, check out Yes Factor with Winnie Sun on the Apple Podcast or anywhere else that you tune in. I've also got new episodes coming out there too, so I'm excited to check out and see how you feel about that. But with that, have a beautiful week. I'm definitely coming back. We've got a lot more programming scheduled for you this week. And of course, we've got In the Loop on Friday as well. It's going to be a fun week. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you. Be well. See you soon. Bye-bye now.